Is it true that if you just got out of prison, the Social Security office and other government agencies are going to give you a whole bunch of money just because you got out of prison? Is it true that the government is giving away money to people who just got released from prison? There's a letter that's been circulating the United States prisons for at least 30 years that tells people when they get out of prison, go to the Social Security office and a number of other government agencies, and these people are going to cut you a check just because you got out of prison. If you've ever been locked up, if you have family and friends who are locked up, then you've probably heard of this infamous letter of instructions for released inmates. Sometimes it's referred to as the offender benefits letter. Offender is not a term that's in much use any longer. It's changing to a variety of other terms like formerly incarcerated, resident, returning citizen. But sometimes the letter is referred to as that letter about offender benefits. I had this letter when I was locked up many years ago. Since I've been out over the last several years, I've had letters from people on the inside, emails, phone calls from family and friends of people in prison. They want to know, is the letter true? What parts of it are true or false, or, can I just kind of explain what's going on with this letter? I've seen it in chat rooms and social media and emails all over the place for the last several years, and nobody can give straightforward answers about all of the details in this letter. So many friends and family have wasted their time trying to find answers for their loved ones in prison that are surrounding this letter, and so I want to spend some time today to answer a lot of the questions and concerns people have. This letter has wasted the time of family and friends of loved ones in prison for decades. Sometimes people will contact me because they think the letter just sounds crazy, but just to be safe, they want it to be verified. And then other people will contact me assuming that government benefits are just the norm. They just want to know the specifics of how to get this money. Here's one example of what it says. What do I do? Where do I go? Who do I talk to? Go immediately upon release to the nearest Social Security office and ask to speak to a counselor so that they can apply for the Social Security Insurance Emergency Supplement benefit of $1,500. Explain that you are emotionally and mentally unprepared to hold a job. Show them your parole or mandatory release papers in order to prove you are just out of prison. Note, you should receive a check within 72 hours. While at the office, fill out the necessary forms for the $310 a month disability benefits for every month you were incarcerated. That's right. This letter tells people that when they get out of prison, number one, they're going to get a check for $1,500 within 72 hours from the Social Security office, and number two, that they'll get monthly benefits of $310 because they're disabled and they're mentally unprepared to hold a job. Many of you might see this and wonder, how could anybody ever believe this? But others of you may have heard stories about so-and-so was actually able to score some benefits from this agency or that agency, and so you might think that a lot of it is true and you just want to know a little bit more about the details. Now, there are different versions of this letter. There are letters that are whittled down to just Texas relevant sources, so I assume that these letters are relevant in different states. And then there's different versions of the letter that's been circulated for 30 years also. The version that I'm using, that I'm going to respond to, is the most common version that's circulated the prisons in the last 30 years. So I'm going to walk through this letter. I'm going to tell you what's true, what's false, what's ambiguous. At least I'm going to do that as it stands in 2021. But these things change frequently, and that's something that I'm going to emphasize throughout. However, before I go on, remember to subscribe to this channel. Down below, it's just a red button. Just click subscribe. It's free. And also click the little bell. That's the notification bell. What that means is that every time I upload a new video, you'll get a notification so you can watch it. I'm not going to answer all these questions in one shot. I'm going to do it in installments. And so when I upload those installments, you'll get a notification. So here's a few quick points to just keep in mind about this letter overall. Number one, it's been circulating the United States prisons for over 30 years. So for my people in Texas, this is not just a Texas-based letter. It's been all over the United States. It's been in New York, it's been in Washington, it's been everywhere. The fact that it has been circulating that long ought to lead you to pause and think about one thing. Government programs change all the time. They change at the local level, the state level, and the federal level. It is not likely that a program that began 30 years ago is still relevant today. In fact, things change so quickly that places like the Texas Workforce Commission has regular meetings to keep everyone up to date about the new policies as they change and are implemented. This is pretty normal in major bureaucratic organizations. So just think for a second about a letter that's been circulated for 30 years talking about specific dollar amounts and paperwork that needs to be filled out. Those things have probably changed. Similarly, it's been circulating the whole country, so the fact that things change at the local, state, and federal level ought to lead you to ask whether or not this information is even relevant to your state in particular. Point number 2. If you add up all of the benefits listed in this letter, whether it's direct cash benefits, like I mentioned, it said the Social Security office is supposed to give you $1,500, or benefits towards getting a car, tools, and enrolling in education, if you add all of those benefits up, this letter is telling you that because you got out of prison for no other reason than the fact that a person has served time and now they are released, that they're going to get over $4,000 worth of benefits from different government agencies. Now, I understand how that can be very exciting to the person serving time in prison, but if you'll just pause to think for a second. Recently, Congress was arguing back and forth over whether they should distribute stimulus checks to people who were affected by COVID, and not only whether they should give stimulus checks, but how much should those stimulus checks be. Now, they argued back and forth for several months to decide how much they wanted to give people. And these are hardworking folks who have lost their jobs because of a natural disaster, a pandemic. And it was that difficult for the government to decide whether or not and how much they should help people out with. So how likely is it that people coming out of prison are going to get benefits that are 3 times the amount of some of the stimulus checks? It's just not likely. Number 3. If you look at the letter, you'll recognize that there are typos, misspelled words, and out-of-date jargon like the use of the words welfare. Any sort of official letter that's coming from a government agency is not going to have things like typos, misspellings, and outdated jargon. So those are a couple of things about the language being used in the letter that ought to lead you to think that maybe there's something up with this letter. So if you remember nothing else from this video, just remember a couple of things. Number 1, most of the information is outdated. Most of the information is not relative to your particular state. So for example, if you're in Texas, it's not relevant to Texas. Most of the information comes from Washington and New York State. And third, most of the information is just false, just plain false. It was false back then and it's false now. But all of these things are not nearly as easy to describe as you might think because of the fact that government policies change and fluctuate so often. So I'm going to walk through this letter, and throughout it I'm also going to give you some important resources you can look to, some other websites, some other documents you can look to, so that you can do further research on your own and verify it wherever you're at and at whatever time you're watching this. The last thing to note is that this letter is on Snopes. I've seen it in chat rooms, online, all sorts of social media groups, everybody asking whether or not this information is true and what is and is not true. And so I'm trying to clear it up as best I can now, but you can find the full text of the letter on Snopes. So stick with me, subscribe to the channel, click the bell so you get a notification. I'm going to make 3 or 4 more videos walking through this letter, explaining as best I can what's true, false, and ambiguous. Thank you.